In this video, I want to talk to you about my top 5 controversial opinions on disability in general. Now, I don't think they're particularly controversial, they're just people seem to think that they're a bit of an unusual opinion for somebody who's got a disability or as society deems to have a disability. So I'm just labelling them controversial for the sake of this video, but for me, they're just my opinion. So, firstly, is around the language of disability. Now, I'm a linguist, I've studied linguistics, I love language, and this is a real pet hate for me. The word disabled in itself means basically you're unable to do something, which is ridiculous. Look at, I would say 95% of people who are disabled, as society would deem them as disabled, they're probably more capable than most of the able-bodied population. Take the Paralympics, for example. You know, most of those guys could give the general population a run for their money in whatever they're doing. So being labelled as disabled, I find really frustrating, and I think we need to find some better language to use that's more inclusive, or not even inclusive, just not as disrespectful in that sense. Number 2 is I genuinely think there are 2 types of disabled subcultures, which isn't something that's considered in the mainstream. You have people who are born with their disability or who got it at a very, very young age and that have no memory of being able-bodied. And that just doesn't mean physically able-bodied. It could be, you know, neurodivergence or something that's hidden. It doesn't have to be a physical disability. And also people that acquire their disability as an adult or as a teenager and have some sort of memory of a life before. I think there is a very different feeling between those 2 groups, and I think the group that is the first group, the ones who are born with their disability, approach life very differently. And I'll go more into this in another video, but I think that's a very big distinction that we should start making between the 2 communities. Number 3 is expectations on society in general. Now, society is geared up for able-bodied people. Most of the population are not disabled and are not physically disabled. So expecting everywhere to be accessible and disability friendly, when disability can be everything from needing to use a wheelchair to being deaf to being blind to being neurodivergent and everything in between, I think is ridiculous. I think is absolutely ridiculous that there's that expectation on society, and people kick up such a fuss when there's not a ramp for somewhere, or when, you know, there's not a hearing loop, or there's not a lift. Like some places aren't equipped, and that's it. I know many places are trying to make themselves as accessible as possible to everyone, but you're not going to be able to accommodate everybody. And if you include something for somebody else is always going to be disadvantaged because of it. So I think expecting everywhere to accommodate everyone is just a ridiculous idea. Number 4, disabled people are just as superficial as everybody else. Right? They're judgmental, they're superficial, they will look at other disabled people and make judgments the same way as able-bodied people do. And that's not something that's spoken about. Everybody has unconscious bias, everyone has a level of prejudice, everyone has a level of privilege that they're not aware of. And I think that's not spoken about in the disabled community at all, or not that I've ever seen. And I think there is some hierarchies, and some disabled people think that they're, you know, more worthy than others to get special treatment, or are more disabled than others. And I just think that's all nonsense, and I think people should be called out for that, even more so when you're part of the community. And people need to check themselves when they have these or are made aware of these unconscious biases. And finally, number 5, not everything is a disability. Not every illness, not every condition, not everything that you can get is a disability. You know, personally, I think it's on a spectrum or a recline even, and I think everything you know, potentially could be considered a disability depending on its severity. But I would be as strong enough to say that an illness, I'm not ill, right? I'm not ill. I don't consider myself ill. I'm not sick. I don't use that word to describe myself. You know, having a vitamin deficiency or maybe having anemia to a certain level, I wouldn't consider a disability. No, I have anemia, but it's treatable. You can have medication to help improve it. My condition can't be improved. So I think there is a distinction around what is a disability and what isn't. But obviously that's, again, probably the most controversial opinion I've got of the 5. And I'll be happy to go into more of that in another video. But there you go. Let me know your thoughts, whether you agree with any of those top 5 or whether you think that I'm going to enrage the woke brigade with these non-PC comments. I hope not. And this is just based on my lived experience as a disabled person. So you're welcome to disagree with me or, you know, highlight some flaws in my arguments. I'm more than happy with that. But please let me know your thoughts. I'm interested to hear what everybody else thinks, especially if you are part of the disabled community. I'd love your feedback. So please pop a comment, like the video, and wait for my next one. And if you're watching this for the first time and you haven't watched my intro video onto who I am and why I've got these opinions, I'll pop a little card up for you to click on to the end to an intro about me video, and hopefully that'll make this one make a bit more sense.